Life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. Except you do, my friend said. It's written on the box. I was at Schoolhouse, a quaint bar in Austin, Texas, with great cocktails and cheese boards. It was my first night out after becoming a mother 6 months prior. Some of my friends, who are playwrights, were in town, so we gathered to catch up. However, our night out was interrupted when a drunk lawyer sitting next to us overheard that we were in theater and shared with us his dream of becoming an actor. Insert eye roll emoticon. In typical white dude fashion, no shade, he invaded our table. Seriously, he left his fiancée at his picnic bench and came over to sit at ours. And ignoring all social cues, he began to demonstrate his miscalling by reciting Forrest Gump quotes to us. Life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get. Except you do, my friend said, half revealing her annoyance and half trying to shut him up. It's written on the box. Sometimes similes work, and sometimes they don't. My life has simplified in some ways since I became a mother. Some of you know that in addition to preaching, my primary profession is theater. However, my repertoire has expanded beyond postmodern deconstructionist text scripts, C-sharp major songs, and nuanced performances into nursery rhymes and exaggerated hand motions. Instead of critiquing the president and America's devolving political charade, I'm evaluating the consistency and color of poop. And wishing my body still produced milk so my small child would fall asleep more quickly at night. There's a metaphor in there somewhere, but if I had enough sleep last night, I'm sure I could find it for you. So the extent of my metaphors right now is Ring Around the Rosie, a children's game where everyone ends up sprawled on the floor. That 18th century rhyme became a metaphor for the Black Death in England, with pockets full of posies warding off the stench of the plagues, and falling down being the quick death of the inflicted. Many nursery rhymes, in fact, reimagine gruesome history in more tangible signals. And so Henry VIII and Cardinal Wolsey become Old Mother Hubbard and her dog. And Queen Mary and the Protestants she tortured become quite contrary in an English garden. But in an attempt to return to the biblical text we read this morning, I suppose it's time to put away Mother Goose and seek out the Good Shepherd. In a gospel known for its symbols, allegory, and metaphor, we read John to discern what it means for us to live our resurrection day after day. In studying the allegorical, symbolic, metaphor-filled teachings of Christ, can we find new life? John 10 is a familiar one to visitors and regulars of the biblical canon, but if you don't recognize the confession from this passage, you probably have heard, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," from Psalm 23, read at a funeral or in a movie like Titanic, Rooster Cogburn, or X-Men Unlimited, or referenced by Pink Floyd in Sheep, Tupac in So Many Tears, or the Grateful Dead in Alabama Getaway, or President George W. in his 9/11 speech. In addition to the iconic Psalm 23, we remember that the Hebrew Scriptures list Abel as the first shepherd who was murdered by his brother Cain, the farmer. All the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, were shepherds too. Moses was a sheep herder in Midian when he encountered the burning bush. And of course, the little boy who used a slingshot to defeat the giant was a shepherd for his dad's flocks. And it was that same David, supposedly the greatest leader of God's people, who was called the shepherd king. In fact, other kings who were considered wicked or unjust rulers were described by the prophets as bad shepherds who could not care for their flock. The Bible likes its pastoral imagery, and Jesus was a product of his culture. But not just the biblical one. Greek philosophers frequently compared governing people to the art of shepherding a flock. Likewise, in the Greek classics, shepherd was a metaphor used to describe leaders. The poet Virgil wrote that a herdsman would lie there at ease under the awning of a spreading beach and practice country songs on a light shepherd's pipe. However, the idyllic, peaceful life of a shepherd was not universally seen as such. Many thought of herdsmen as suspicious characters, rough, unscrupulous wanderers. Either way, in John, Jesus uses familiar language to create a picture for his listeners. I am the gate, he says. I am the shepherd. I am not the thief or the robber or the hired hand or the gatekeeper. I'm the good shepherd. This is a rather striking statement since we already know that shepherd in both Jewish and Greek culture was a metaphor for rulers and kings. I am the good king, Jesus essentially says. It's a pretty political statement for a man who had a run-in with the religious leaders in the previous chapter. His listeners were not amused. His metaphors made no sense to them. For us, 2,000 years later, the words and symbols may be just as difficult to understand. It's important to remember, though, that symbols are a way in which the writer brings seemingly discordant elements into agreement with each other. The root meaning of the word symbol is to put together. And in John's gospel, the symbols help us understand how seemingly contradictory ideas can be brought together. Why would he use a metaphor associating himself with the ruling party? If he's performing miracles, why do the religious leaders keep trying to stop him? To begin to decipher the symbolism the writer of this gospel uses, we also have to read the previous chapter. In John 9, Jesus encounters a beggar man born blind, and he heals him. You've seen the YouTube video of the man putting on the Star Trek glasses and being able to see his family? That's what happens here, except with mud and spit and water. Jesus gives this man sight for the first time in his life. Amazing. Except it's the Sabbath. So there are rules about what a Jew is allowed to do and not do on that day. And Jesus broke about 3 of them by performing this miracle. So the Pharisees lose their marbles. Confusion ensues because one of 2 things is taking place. Either a righteous man doing miracles is breaking the Sabbath, or God's miracles are being performed by a lawbreaker. It's a conundrum either way. So the Pharisees' brilliant solution was to negate the miracle. The man was never blind, they asserted. Except the testimony of the now seeing man and even his parents proved otherwise. He had indeed been born blind since birth. And to make matters worse, having been healed by Jesus, the beggar man tells the Pharisees, "You guys, he healed me. He has to be a man from God, a prophet or Messiah." And so with the now seeing man's confession, the Pharisees kick him out of the synagogue, the place of worship and community and belonging for all the Jews. Remember when the Pharisees confronted his parents? They were terrified of losing access to this synagogue. "He's a grown man. Ask him," they said of their son. And their fears were warranted because with the beggar's experience, unadulterated and exposed, he's kicked out. However, when Jesus hears that the religious leaders have driven the beggar out of the synagogue because of his testimony, Jesus searches for the man. Jesus finds him, and the formerly blind beggar is told by Jesus that he's seen, literally, the Son of God. And the man looks Jesus in the eye and confesses, "I believe." Outside of the synagogue, on the dusty streets of the beautiful city, the blind man sees. Do you see why John 9 and 10 go hand in hand? The beggar recognizes Jesus as God outside the religious center. It isn't just that Jesus is the shepherd of the sheep in the safety of the fold. Remember, he's also the gate. Because the beggar worshiped God only after leaving the religious center, a beggar on the outside just became an insider. Careful, though. If you're ready to take down the religious leaders, then or today, for our hypocrisy, revisit the text. The issue is not whether or not you're a Pharisee or a beggar, an insider or an outsider. The question at stake is whether you listen to the voice of the shepherd. And according to Jesus, the fold has sheep, but also robbers and thieves and hired hands and gatekeepers. Perhaps Forrest's metaphor should have said, life is like a fold of sheep. You never know what you're going to get. Because Jesus doesn't stop with sheep and bandits and hired hands and doormen. I have other sheep too, he says. Sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock and one shepherd. Oh man, do not tell the fundamentalists about this verse. Interpretation of this verse in the context of issues addressed in John may include Jews who believed in Jesus. It may mean Samaritans who practiced what Jews believed to be a corrupted version of Judaism. It may mean Greeks. But again, it's a metaphor and not one that Jesus went on to explain. I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must bring them also. I think of the previous chapter of the blind beggar whose belief in Jesus took him socially and spiritually from the outside to the inside. And I think of the Hebrew scriptures, the texts Jesus read. Do you know who the first person was to give God a name? It was Hagar, teenager and almost mother of Abraham's firstborn son. Had there been a Me Too movement of the Bible, she would have been the antecedent. Hagar was raped by Abraham and beaten by Sarah, so she ran away from the tents. Alone and pregnant in the desert, far away from the safety of the camp, she encounters God. Sound familiar? To this slave girl who had been manipulated and used by God's chosen ones to ensure God's promises, God arrived. And in response, Hagar named God El Roi. And El Roi means the God who sees. Who else does God see that we don't? I have other sheep who do not belong to this fold. I am the good shepherd. And I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I come that they may have life and have it abundantly. The fold may seem safe with its walls and its gatekeeper, but it isn't the fold that allows us to have abundant life. It's the gate. Outside the walls is the pasture, and we get to come and go. It's right there in the text. Because Jesus is the gate, we get to explore and live abundantly in the world. The beggar's belief didn't come until he encountered Christ outside of the synagogue. what redemption can happen in our own beautiful city outside the walls of this church? Because God is out there too. Just out of curiosity, what if we let go of the presumption that we know who God's sheep are? My pastor in Austin once said, imagine how many of the troubles in our world, the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, sex trafficking, bullying, imagine how many of those would end if we learned to honor our bodies and the bodies of others. How does viewing others with humility, knowing that God can love whomever God wants, change the way you view our city or change the way you treat others? How does it change the way you view yourself? I don't work at this church, but it's been my experience that this community works hard to be welcoming and reconciling. So if you are one who, like the blind man, was kicked out of traditional religious institutions because of your experience with Christ, know that you belong here. Or if you were a victim of a thief or robber hiding in the folds of the church, you are worthy of healing. As I've already mentioned, my life is consumed by nursery rhymes and lullabies. After reading the text for today, I had Mary Had a Little Lamb stuck in my head for days. But as I struggled with John 9 and 10 with these symbols and its metaphors, a different song took its place. In the song Lullaby by the Dixie Chicks, they sing the question, how long do you want to be loved? And I think John 9 and 10 ask the same question of us. How long do you want to be loved? Is forever enough? I preached this sermon on the day of my son's dedication to God, and it was very strange to type the words, "You are free to come and go." What sort of wondrous God encourages that narrative? Maybe one who reminds us that while we may love our church and our denomination, or even our religion, we are not her only children. Or maybe one who reminds us again and again that we are worthy. We are sought after. We are loved by a God who is both the shepherd and the gate and a voice calling us to abundant life. As you wander through this troubled world in search of all things beautiful, you can close your eyes and you're miles away. You'll hear my voice like a serenade. How long do you want to be loved? Is forever enough? Is forever enough? How long do you want to be loved? Is forever enough? 'Cause I'm never, never giving you up. Is forever enough? 'Cause I'm never, never giving you up. Amen.